This is Joe with Cloud First Labs. This video is going to show how to easily integrate MuleSoft IDP, Intelligent Document Processing, with MuleSoft APIs. You can really easily hook this into your API ecosystem. There's a lot of buzz about IDP. It's newly released, so let's go take a look at it. For our demo use case, we are going to pull invoice PDF attachments out of a Gmail inbox using the Gmail API. So we're going to have a Mule API that's kind of the hub. It's doing most of the orchestration work here. This Mule API is going to be called. It's going to look up messages in a Gmail inbox that have a PDF attachment. And for each PDF attachment that it finds, it's going to call into IDP to extract invoice information from that document. And so we're going to show in this video how to configure document actions like extract invoice info within IDP. And then we're also going to show how to publish that and then how to develop a Mule application to use that published IDP document action. Finally, after getting the results out of IDP and making the API call to get those back into this invoice processing Mule API, we're going to stick the results into a SQL database. This is just simulating that you could be pumping this information that's easily found by the intelligent document processing OCR process. It can be stored in a database, or it can be stored in a true purchase or a true invoicing system. It can get stored in your system of record or wherever else it needs to be stored. It can this API can take advantage of Mule's processing and orchestration capabilities to do whatever you want with it, but our simple use case is just going to stuff the information in a SQL database. To start out, let's go take a look at this Gmail inbox where we're going to read invoice attachments from. If I come here, this is what we've got configured, and you can see we've got 4 emails in this inbox. 3 of them have sample invoices. So we can look at these. They're in PDF format. They're all invoices to Cloud First Labs. And, we can see the information that is in each one. So these are the documents that are going to be pumped into MuleSoft IDP for that intelligent document processing, and we're going to use the results of that from an API running in regular MuleSoft. Next, let's look at the man of the hour, intelligent document processing. So let's go ahead and configure a new document action in IDP. We'll see how easy, how straightforward this is. And then we'll go from there on hooking that into a MuleSoft API. So we're going to come to any point platform, and boom, here's intelligent document processing. Let's click get started, and we're going to go ahead and create a new document action here. I'm going to call this demo invoice extract, because you see there are, out of the box, there are 2 types that are just part of IDP. That's invoice and purchase order, because those are commonly used throughout the industry. It can extract this information automatically from invoice documents. These common fields: invoice date, invoice number, purchase order number, the parties involved, kind of information about the different line items on the invoice. So, it does this by default, and we can customize it and provide it prompts to gather additional information if we see fit. So let's go ahead and create this demo invoice extract. And I'm just going to go ahead and do one prompt here. I'm going to call it salesperson. And who is the salesperson? And this confidence threshold, this can be adjusted up or down. Basically, it gets marked for review. It's not marked successful if the algorithm running this intelligent document processing, if it has a confidence level of below 80 in this case, it's going to, instead of marking the OCR process successful, it's going to mark it manual validation required. So I'm going to go ahead and click add here to add that prompt. You can add as many prompts as you want. You can do the same thing with the percentages and the required, not required fields. You can do that on any of these auto-generated fields as well. So like, let's say if tax must be found, otherwise it needs to be flagged, you can mark this required. Same thing, this confidence threshold. Let's say in our case, hey, it's really important that we know the tax and that we have it accurately. So we're going to say it's going to be 90% or higher. Otherwise, this should be flagged for review. If it comes in at 88%, hey, we want to take a look at it. We don't want to trust the algorithm with that tax value. So we'll mark that to 90%. You can do that with any of these fields. You can do that with the prompt. But now that we've done that, let's select a file and let's see it work, work right here in the UI. So now we've got our configuration set up, we've got a sample file, and I'm going to click run. Okay, we fast forwarded a couple minutes here and we are back. The processing completed, and we can see that this was able to gather a bunch of the information. It was able to parse it right out of the PDF. And so let's say sales tax, and look at that. We bumped up the threshold to 90%. It still cleared it. It's 99.92% confident that this $20 is appropriately the tax for this PDF. So this is how it works in the UI. And so I'm going to go ahead and save it here. And now to be able to call this from a MuleSoft API, we need to publish this document action. So demo invoice extract is the document action. We need to publish this into Exchange. So I'm going to click publish. Oh, wait, first we need to add reviewers. Okay. In this case, I'm just going to add myself as a reviewer. So what that means is it's going to show up in my queue once we publish this. If this document action executes and something gets marked for review, manual validation required, it's going to show up for me under my review tasks over here. So I've added myself. I'll save. And now that it's saved, I'm going to retry publish. And, again, this might take a minute. We might have to fast forward. Okay, we've fast forwarded a minute, and here we go, successfully published. And, you can discover this action in RPA Builder, and you can view the published action in Exchange. Since in this case, we're going to talk about how to call it from an API, we care about the published action in Exchange. So let's go take a look. We click this link. It's going to pop this open. And we're going to see that, here's the name, demo invoice extract. We are going to have an endpoint on here. Here we go. We see this whole URL. And we're going to find there are two different endpoints. There's a post and the get. So what happens is you post to a document action to kick off the document action, to kick off the extract, to do the OCR processing, like what we saw in the UI. And then you'll get back an ID, an execution ID, and then you use that execution ID to check on the status. And then you're going to get back a JSON response from this get call that will have all the details of the processed document. So with this in mind, we've got what we need set up here, except we're going to need a connected app. We're going to need, because this is protected by OAuth 2.0, we're going to need a connected app that is able to call these endpoints. And we're going to configure the connected app client ID and client secret into our Mule application. So let's go ahead and create that, that connected app. So we're going to come here to Access Management, Connected Apps, and I'm going to call this CFL IDP Connected App 2, and it acts on its own behalf. We're going to add scopes. What we care about in this case is we want this to be able to execute published actions under document actions. So that's all we need here. I'm going to add it to our business group, and boom, add the scopes. Save. And now I can copy the client ID, I can copy the client secret, and configure those into a Mule application. So we'll go take a look at that next. Okay, before we hop into AnyPoint Studio to take a look at the MuleSoft code for this, let's just review the use case again from the architecture diagram level. So we're going to be pulling emails out of a Gmail inbox where if they have PDF attachments and they're unread and they're in the inbox, Mule is going to pull those. And then for each one, it's going to fire it off to IDP, to that API that was just generated that we just looked at in Exchange. And that's going to extract invoice info, but it's running behind the scenes. So it's going to send an acknowledgement back that, like, yes, it's working on that, but then we're just going to have to check periodically to see, like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? And eventually it will be done, and then we will pull those results back that were parsed out automatically by IDP, and we will store them in a SQL database. So that's just the general flow that we're going to look at here. Let's pop over here to AnyPoint Studio, and you'll see I've already got a bunch of the code in place for this. So let's look at the high-level design here. First, we're going to post attachments to IDP flow, or post attachments to IDP. So, that's going to get the attachments out of the Gmail inbox, and it's going to fire them off to that API that we saw in Exchange. And then it's going to run, behind the scenes. Then we're going to move on to the next step where it's going to, for each one of those attachments, it's going to check over and over, basically, are you done yet? If you are, get the results and store them in a database until all of the attachments have been completed, all of the processes within IDP have been completed, and then at the end we'll be able to look at the database and see the results. And then there's simply a step at the end to transform the message. Since it's a parallel for each scope that we use, there are a bunch of payloads in play. It kind of combines those into one response payload to show up in the browser. Since for this, simple example, we just have, a simple HTTP listener, and this is, something you could call via the browser or via an API call. Now that we know the overview of how this is going to work, let's take a look in a little more detail. We're not going to go into detail on the Gmail API side of things. I've done a previous blog post and video on integrating MuleSoft with the Gmail API using MuleSoft's Gmail connector. So check that out if you want more detail on how to make that work. But what we really care about is this. And this was generated with a different document action. So I'm going to delete this out of here, and we're going to use the one that we just created. But, we're going to focus on this. This is the call to that API that we looked at in Exchange that will post document data to IDP and let it do its thing. Let it process that, extract a bunch of data about the passed in document. And then later on, we will, when we're getting IDP data for attachments and storing in database, after we've posted all of the attachments, now we're going to loop over, in parallel, we're going to do a parallel for each and be getting the results from that API that we saw in Exchange. And, it's going to retry if it's not in succeeded status or manual validation required status. So effectively, if it's in progress, it's going to retry. And, I think I've got it set. Yeah, it checks every 5 seconds for 3 minutes. And then once it has successfully completed or moved to manual validation required or succeeded for each one of the attachments, then it's able to move on, and this flow ref can, or this subflow can complete, and then it will come back up here and it'll spit out a friendly response. But as part of that completion step, it's storing the results to a table, either the invoices table if the payload status is succeeded, or if it's manual validation required, it's going to insert it into invoices to review. So that's generally what we're going to do. So now let's see what we need to do to configure this part. So I'm going to rip out, since this was a different document action that it was set up for, I'm going to delete that. Same thing down here. Actually, I'll come back to that one. Okay, so we want to put this in between these two loggers. So how do we find that? How do we find that document action that we just configured within intelligent document processing? Well, let's go search in Exchange. If you recall, I had named this as demo invoice extract. So let's search for that. And there it is, version 1.0.0. It's Cloud First Labs as the publisher. So we're going to add that module and click Finish. So it's going to download it. This might, it doesn't take long at all. So now let's search over here, demo invoice extract. So here we're getting the attachment, and now we want to post that attachment to IDP to do its work. So we're going to go ahead and do that here. We're going to do the post document action execution. We're going to post the payload. We'll come back to how that gets set because it's multi-part form data. There can be a couple little snags with that. But first, let's configure the connector configuration. So we're going to come here, and of course, in a real-world environment, we're going to use properties for this and secure secret values, things of that nature. But in our case, we're just showing the functionality, how this works at a basic level. So we're just going to hard code some of these values in. So host, we're going to come back to Exchange and find this. We grabbed the URL earlier, but I didn't paste it in my clipboard. So let's try this again. Here we go. This time I've got the whole URL pasted. In this case, we only need the host. So in our case, that's going to be IDP-RT US East 1 anypoint MuleSoft.com port, HTTP port 443. Base path we can leave alone. Protocol is going to be HTTPS. Response timeout, you can set it to whatever you want. I'm going to set it to 30 seconds. This is in milliseconds, so that's why it's 30,000. And then client ID and client secret. These are the client ID and the client secret generated earlier in access management for the connected app that has the execute document actions permission. So we do this, and I'm going to test the connection, and this should come back successfully. We're going to give it a shot. Test connection successful. Okay, that's great. So our connector is configured appropriately. Now, obviously, there's always legwork to get the attachment. Again, that's kind of beyond the scope. We're getting it out of Gmail, but just know Gmail is returning it, in this case, as a base 64 encoded string. So we need to get that base 64 encoded string turned into the type of payload that needs to be sent to this API. And it's a little tricky when you look here. It doesn't give a lot of detail it just says multi-part form-data, any instance of data is allowed. It doesn't really give you a lot of specification about what type of data should go in here. So this is a really key point in the video, seeing how to properly set up multi-part form data for this API. And what you need is a part named file that holds the binary data. We don't want it in base 64. So in our case, since we had it in base 64 encoding, we had to call from base 64. So we use this DW core binaries data weave library, convert it from base 64 back to binary. And because of the way Google had done its base 64 encoding, I was running into an issue. I found a helpful MuleSoft article that pointed me in this direction. At first, I was getting error messages trying to go from base 64, trying to decode it. It was giving me like an invalid character 2D, something like that. I looked into that and found, hey, there's this like replace. So basically, we're taking the field payload.data, the base 64 encoded attachment, and then we're replacing certain values with, we're replacing a minus sign with a plus sign. We're replacing a period with a space, replacing an underscore with a slash. So, that's just something really specific to the base 64 encoding that was applied here versus the base 64 encoding expected by this data weave library. But anyway, what you'll see is you need multi-part form data as the output. You can assign a boundary. This isn't a meaningful number. It just, you just need to set a boundary here. And then you've got your file, and then content disposition name is file name. I've got a variable that holds the file name, so we apply that. Give it the content type of application/PDF because that's the type of data we're sending over in this case. And then here's the content. So, that's what we need to configure here to set the payload up for sending it across to post document action execution. So now let's go down. There's one other interface with IDP. So again, let's just look at our architecture diagram again. We have the execute document action. That's what we just set up. Now we need to get the result of the document action because it's not simultaneous that the result comes back. It's long running in the background. So you're going to have to check. It may or not be completed. So you might have to wait, check again, wait, check again. So that's what we're setting up here. And again, this was set up with a different document action. So I'm going to take this out. And now from the demo invoice, we're going to pull in get document action execution. And we are going to do this for execution ID for the one stored in the variable named execution ID. We're going to get the data from this. And so this is the get call here that's defined within Exchange. So we're going to get back a big JSON output ultimately for the document that was passed in here. So that is the configuration. After that, again, this isn't really what the video is about, but we're storing it into a database. If it's status succeeded, it's going to put it in invoices. If it comes back manual validation required, so the default case here, it's going to insert it into invoices to review. We've just got some simple database tables set up for this. But again, this could be, you can use your imagination on what type of system this data might be getting passed on to. But anyway, that's all in place. So now with this in place, let's go ahead and save it and deploy it. And then we'll check back once it's deployed and let it rip. We'll have those three attachments from the email inbox that we looked at early on in the video that should get processed, and we should ultimately see them go into the database, and we can see the data returned by IDP. Okay, fast forwarding, just checking back in. I had a silly mistake that kept this from working successfully. I was very surprised when at first it did not work, and I found out why. I left the Varus.execution ID. I did not switch into expression mode for that. So anyway, now I will save this and redeploy, and we'll rejoin once this has deployed successfully. Okay, we are back. We deployed successfully this time. That little issue should be cleared up. So let's go ahead and run a request to trigger this endpoint. And here we go. Attachments to database has been called. We see some output generating down here. Okay, and now this is okay that we're seeing an error message. So this is part of the design, and since we're in debug mode, it catches any errors and stops on them. So this error is thrown because the status doesn't seem to be complete. So if we look at the response, it's still in progress. So we ran this, we kicked off the document processing, but it's not done yet. And we checked, and MuleSoft doesn't have a do while type of idea. So what we have to do is an until successful, and we throw an error if if it's not in either succeeded status or manual validation required. So if it's not complete, we throw an error, so it'll come back as part of this until successful and try again to get the data. So with that being the case, let's run. We're gonna have to click a few times here because there were 3 different documents that this is processing. But now if we look down here at the console, we're seeing a bunch of data being spit out, and I bet, hey, if we look up here, we have this data being returned. So this combines all of the data generated by IDP. And if you remember, within IDP, we didn't have to configure much of anything, and it's able to find and parse all of this information. We did, however, configure a prompt. So let's see what it found. So there's nothing built into the invoice thing about salesperson, but we added a prompt to say, hey, who's the salesperson? And for one document, it found Oscar Ward. Okay, for another one, it found Dorothy Smith. And okay, those are the only. So the other document must not have found anything. So nothing was returned there. That checks out. We can even look at our inbox to kind of validate that. Sample invoice A. Okay, this is probably the one that did not find a salesperson. Sample invoice B, salesperson, Dorothy Smith. We saw that in the JSON. So, it was able to go and find that, even though it's not baked in as an automatic field to look for. Our prompt encouraged it to go find it and grab it. And likewise, one more salesperson, Oscar Ward. So we see that. We see, a bunch of these other values are going to look really familiar from what was found there. And now let's go ahead and let's look at the database to see what that looks like. So let's go ahead and look here at SQL Server at MySQL at the database, and we see, bam, it's got those 3 documents. It's got the invoice number, it's got the total, and it did have an unknown. So there was one that it didn't find a field, but it's able. And if we mark that field required, if we mark the vendor name field required on the IDP configuration, that would have kicked this into a manual review type of situation. But since we didn't mark it required, it was okay with it being unknown. And we just, it didn't have a value in the JSON payload that came back. So we stuffed it in here as unknown. But this database, you can think of this as being any system that you want to propagate this invoice data out to. You see how easy it was to configure this within IDP to gather a whole bunch of information about the invoice. And there were disparate types of invoice files. Like not one of these was the same. It was like, we were getting invoiced by 3 different companies, and IDP knew how to handle it in all 3 of those cases. So this goes to show the power, the ability of IDP to really do some good processing of documents, of invoices, of purchase orders, and it can be set up for generic documents as well. You just have to provide prompts to ask it what to look for, and you can hook that IDP very easily into an API-led solution using MuleSoft APIs and orchestrate it to anywhere and everywhere. MuleSoft is great with integration, and so you can see how easily you can hook into Gmail, hook into a database, hook into a target system, and also hook right into intelligent document processing. So for your automation and integration needs, be sure to keep checking back with what MuleSoft is releasing, and check back with us at Cloud First Labs as we're trying to stay on top of automation and integration technologies and help you in your automation and integration journeys. Thank you for your time.